When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Abbey. User: Prop 45T. Posted May 1st, 1997.
Arizona never caught the 50s diner wave like everywhere else. We've always been a drive-in kind of state. The Abbey, with its chromed-out stools and lunch counter, was an exception, though my mom never cared for it, so when I was a kid, my old man would take us to the Polar Bar drive-in down on Central Avenue instead. Once a month, the three of us would sit there in the heat of a Phoenix night and split the mother of all ice cream sundaes, the Zombie. That bad boy was a quart of ice cream covered with chopped peanuts and 5 different kinds of fruit, served in a bowl that I swear was the size of my head. That's a fond memory, and not something I wanted to have conjured by a teenager slumped face down at a table with the back of his head and most of its contents missing. And yet, the way the Abbey's overhead light made the smears of red and brown gristle on the inside of his white skull glow, it sure looked like someone had dug in and licked their bowl clean. I didn't think this job could surprise me. Phoenix is a rough city that only seems to be getting rougher. It's the sort of place where some sick fuck decapitating a 22-year-old girl and tossing her head in the canal last fall was just another story for Cameron Harper to talk about on the evening news. People were afraid, and that fear made them cold to each other. I could see it whenever I questioned witnesses. To them, everyone was a potential suspect, a threat. No one could be trusted. The things which had held this city's soul together during its long history, community, kindness, were falling apart. And I believe what we saw that night at the Abbey Diner was the end result of rot finally getting a foothold. The call had come in late enough I had to fight my way up through layers of dreams to snatch the phone before it disturbed Marcy. Multiple homicide at the Abbey Diner, dispatch said. Come fast, come quiet. I went into the living room, called my partner Tenta to let him know I was on my way, and 30 minutes later we were rolling up on scene. Half a dozen squad cars had blocked off 3rd Avenue and Monroe Street, their light bars dark. An ashen-faced patrolman, Woods, led us through the cordon. The Abbey Diner was named for the actual Abbey across the street, or at least what's left of it. Once upon a time, it had been a church, a rock-solid part of the community that's now condemned and waiting for demolition. In the daytime, its mission-style bell tower casts a long shadow over the restaurant that used to serve its parishioners. Parking my Lincoln underneath it that night, shadows came almost all the way down its crumbling stone front, as if the building were a memory in the process of being forgotten. A group of uniforms was clustered around the door, one of them standing slightly apart from them, a sheepish look on his face. "This you?" I pointed at a puddle of fresh vomit on the sidewalk. He nodded, embarrassed. "You didn't do it inside, too, did you?" "No, sir, just here. I'm sorry, but I've never seen anything like this." "Like what?" Another patrolman interrupted, a blandly handsome 20-something who introduced himself as Jeffries. He and his partner had been first on scene. "We stop here for coffee sometimes," Jeffrey said. "Night shift, you know, it helps." I walked up to the door and saw that. That was a thick smear of brownish red across the inside of a long window facing onto the street. It was redder when I first got here. It could only be one thing, you know? I drew my sidearm and entered the building. That's when I found them. With Jeffries in tow, Tenta and I went into the Abbey diner where an earthy copper smell greeted us. I coughed and covered my mouth, retching. Even Tenta, who's been doing this job longer than I have, swore and closed his eyes for a few seconds. From where I stood, I could see at least a dozen corpses, most of them on the ground next to a line of booths that extended to the back of the restaurant. One corpse was closer than the others, a woman who looked to have been in her 20s. She was blonde and sweet-looking, almost elfin, laying on her back, legs tangled. Whoever had done this had torn her jugular open from the back while she was trying to get away, explaining that smear on the window. From the look of things, Blondie hadn't been the only one trying to escape. What appeared to be another 4 bodies were heaped a dozen feet further in. Tenta went first, stepping carefully around pools of congealing blood, the same red as the booths. Just beyond the stack of bodies was the dead teenager missing the inside of his head. My memories of the polar bear were interrupted when I noticed a smell like cooking meat. Tenta turned to Jeffries. "Is there something still on the grill?" Jeffries blanched. "Yes, sir, Tenta cocked his head. "You weren't sure if you should touch anything?" The patrolman nodded. The back door was open. I closed and locked that, shut the walk-in cooler, but the grill, I thought it was better if I left it. "Yeah, that's a good call, kid. Always leave that shit till one of us gets here. Come on, show me where it is and we'll turn it off before it catches fire." He moved around the counter, off toward the kitchen, but Jeffries didn't follow. "It's right through there, sir, and to the right. You can't miss it." Tenta frowned. I said, "Show me." The younger man went even whiter. "I'd rather not have to look at it again if it's all the same." Tenta sighed, annoyed. "No, it's not all the same. Come the fuck on. This is the job, kid." Jeffries reluctantly went ahead, leading my partner into the kitchen. I turned my attention to the bodies on the floor, their faces disfigured so badly as to be unrecognizable. Squatting down to get a better look, I could see that they'd been slashed almost literally to ribbons. They looked more like hamburger than human beings. "Jesus fucking Christ!" It was Tenta calling from the kitchen. "Lee, get in here." I jumped up, my knees popping, and headed for the kitchen. That earthy funk was in here too, combining with the cooking meat to give me a pretty good idea of what hell must smell like. It didn't take long to see what Tenta had been talking about. The back of the cook's head had been demolished and emptied, same as the kid's. Whoever had done it had left him face down on the grill, cooking his cheek black and eyes solid. It was one of the worst things I've ever seen. Tenta pulled out a clean handkerchief and was about to turn off the grill when a shriek came from further back in the restaurant. It was followed by a heavy thumping sound. Jeffries jumped. Tenta just looked annoyed. The fuck is that? Another shriek, this one louder and full of rage, an even harder thump. We drew our weapons and carefully moved between stacks of plates and a row of bubbling fryers toward the swinging door at the kitchen's rear. On the other side, we found dry storage, shelves full of canned goods and plastic jugs of bacon bits. There was a third shriek, this time easier to pinpoint. It was coming from behind the walk-in cooler's heavy steel door, which jumped with the accompanying thud. We all reflexively stepped back, Tenta casting an annoyed look Jeffrey's way. "I thought you said you checked the walk-in." No, Jeffrey stammered. "The door was open, just a bit. I closed it." Tenta sighed in annoyance. "Whoever's in there, identify yourself. This is Phoenix PD." A new sound emerged from inside the cooler. This one a sustained growl, so low I felt my bowels loosen slightly. Tenta quashed a look of surprise a hair too slowly. "What the fuck is that, John?" I said, louder than I meant to. Jeffries was the only one of us not bothered by this new sound. In fact, our reactions seemed to galvanize him, his posture firmed up, expression hardening. I suppose he saw this as his chance for redemption after fumbling the ball by locking what was probably our suspect in the cooler. The younger officer walked past Tenta and I with purpose, and before either of us could stop him, tugged on the steel latch. "Phoenix PD, put your..." was the last thing that poor kid ever said. His final word rising to a cry that would have put an air raid siren to shame. Whatever was in there moved so fast with such explosive force that Jeffries is the only one of us to get a good look, and he didn't live long enough to share. Something impacted the center of his forehead so hard it blew apart like a rotten melon. Covered in gray matter, a shock Tenta pinwheeled backwards into me, a career worth the poise undone in a second. Together, we fell to the ground, a distorted vision of black feathers shot above us, razor-sharp talons dragged over my skin as it passed just lightly enough to shred my sport coat and draw narrow furrows of blood. The swinging door was no match, splintering as our attacker made its escape. Out on the diner floor, I heard screams, gunshots, and breaking glass, all punctuated by those awful fucking shrieks. Tenta was on top of me, thankfully still breathing. With a grunt, I pushed him off, standing on shaky legs. I quickly poked my finger through the remains of my coat and shirt, wincing at the pain. "Tenta, you good?" He waved me off before using the backside of his tie to wipe Jeffrey's brains off his face. I kneeled long enough to pick up my Glock, then ran, following a trail of destruction through the kitchen and into the diner proper, where the bodies on the floor had been joined by those of another 4 patrolmen. Their bellies had been split open to release ropes of glistening intestines on the floor. Outside, everyone was in an uproar, firing wildly into the sky. Whatever it was, it had taken flight. I ran into the cool night, aiming up only to see it was well beyond the range of pistol fire. The monster, what else could it have been, was on top of the church tower, spreading its feathered wings under a moonless sky. I flinched as the remaining uniforms opened fire, their rounds peppering the Abbey's masonwork facade, failing to come anywhere near their target. With a guttural roar, the thing took flight and vanished into the night.
Subject, IL Divoratore. User, ORM8 Heal. Posted, May 17, 1999.
For months now, I've been waking up every single night, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. My body is frozen, my chest tight, like something heavy is pressing down on me. I can't move, can't scream. My eyes instinctively dart around the dark room, searching, even though my brain begs for them not to, knowing full well what I'll find. There, in the corner, just beyond the reach of the moonlight, something watches me, a shadow darker than the rest of the night, standing still but breathing with a rasping inhale, followed by a deep exhale, like dry leaves scraping across stone. I want to believe it's a trick of my mind. Hell, I've spent months trying to convince myself it is some half-waking nightmare, but look, I know better. This has been happening for far too long, and each and every night, the figure lingers just a little longer. When I was a child, my great-grandmother, an old woman with hands like gnarled roots and a voice like brittle parchment, used to tell me stories, dark ones, about her family back in the old country. Slowly, with a thick accent, she'd describe an ancient curse that was put on the men back in Italy and passed down through generations. She said that her great-great-grandfather and his brother made a deal with a supernatural being that looked like a man, but wasn't, selling his soul in exchange for riches. The money came and went, but the creature never left. She called it Il Divoratore, the Devourer. She said it had bird talons for feet and feathers covering parts of its body, but it stood upright like a man, watching with deep, glowing red eyes. She warned my cousins and I that unless we learned our catechism and lived as good little Catholic boys, it would come for us in the night. I always thought she was trying to scare the hell out of us, make sure we went to church, observed Lenten, didn't eat meat on Fridays, but now, lying here, paralyzed beneath its gaze, I wonder if she was trying to save me. So yesterday morning, I made a decision. I would obey my grandmother and go to confession. St. Francis's was quiet when I entered, hollow. The weight of incense wafted through the air. It had been years since I had last been, but I remembered the drill. Entering the confessional and kneeling, heart hammering and wait till the small screen slid open. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been at least 2 decades since my last confession. I began before breaking into tears and telling the priest everything. The dreams, the night terrors, the shadow in my room, the curse. I then took a deep breath of relief and waited for him to tell me it is all just superstition, that I should just go home and say a few Hail Marys and everything will be all right. But instead, there was silence. Father? I asked. Nothing. Father, are you there?" A firm voice finally bellowed through the other side of the confessional, "Son, you have to leave, now." I pressed my hands against the wooden screen, trying to understand. "Father, please, what am I supposed to do?" But the screen slammed shut before I heard him quickly exit the confessional, muttering prayers under his breath. By the time I got out of the enclosure, I saw him making his way past the altar and back into the rear of the church. "Father, please," I screamed. But before the echoes of my voice finished reverberating through the rafters, he was gone. So last night, obviously, I did not sleep. I didn't dare. I know now that my great-grandmother was right. Il Divoratore is real, and it is waiting. I forced myself to stay awake, pacing my apartment, drinking cup after cup of coffee. Every time I started to drift, my head bobbing, I jolted myself upright. My body is still exhausted, but fear is stronger than fatigue. Then, just as I started to think I might make it to sunrise, I heard it, breathing, slow, deliberate, from the corner of my room. My heart seized, my breath shallow, my body locked up again, my limbs leaden, my vision sharpened as pure adrenaline coursed through me, and that's when I saw it, the devourer. The figure was closer now, no longer lurking in the shadows, but standing at the foot of my bed. Its shape was all wrong. Too tall, limbs too long, fingers curled into talons, what looked like millions of tiny feathers shifting and rustling as it moved, but it just watched me. My great-grandmother's words echoed in my mind. "Read your catechism, boy." I squeezed my eyes shut and forced my lips to move. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." But as I mumbled the prayer, I heard the thing breathe in sharply, followed by a low, rattling growl. The air turned thick, suffocating, pressing against my chest. I pushed the words out faster, my voice shaking. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death." But before I could let out that final word, that final amen, "So be it," I felt its breath in my ear, followed by a deep, guttural voice. "You belong to me." The next thing I knew, it was morning. Birds chirping, sun filling the day with warmth. Everything seemed to be at peace, except for me. I am gonna go back to St. Francis's today, and I don't know how I'm gonna get that damn priest to talk to me, but I am not leaving till I get an answer.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. but move fast before the server
goes offline.